Deltarune Chapter 3 is on its way, so what could we expect from one of the most lore-heavy games out there that cleverly hides its own story around the game? About 1 year ago, I discovered the prized game for making your head spin known as Deltarune, that most people know was made by the creator of Undertale, but what most people don't know is this game saved my channel. About a year ago, I was ready to throw in the towel on this particular channel, not quite understanding what it takes to make a decent YouTube video that most people also want to watch. So after searching out what I consider the most qualified group of people that specialize in helping YouTubers and running through their system, I was ready to roll out my channel once again, and started with the recently released second chapter of a game that satisfies my thinking compulsion, Deltarune. So looking at clues for Deltarune's upcoming third chapter, we discover quite a few hidden gems that point at not only the cast of characters that will be joining us in the chapter's strange new setting, but also as to who the chapter's overarching villain and wacky secret boss will be, while letting us make some informed predictions as to the chapter's weird route. Chapter 2 ended with Chris slashing the tires of Toriel's car before leaving the door to the house open for the police and others to unknowingly walk into the new dark fountain they opened up. Well, this means that Chris's mom, Toriel, and Susie are sure to be joining Chris's party, and the relationship between Chris and their protective mom is certain to be in for a roller coaster ride as Toriel watches Chris struggle as a puppet of the player. This also means that we might see Undyne get pulled into the new world, as she was presumably the one to answer the phone when Toriel called the police about her car. Undyne might just be a perfect fit to take the role of the character that wanders around exploring the world on their own terms, just as Susie did in Chapter 1 and Birdly did in Chapter 2. As when speaking to Undyne in the town, she continually says things like, "This job is so boring, nothing ever happens in this town. I just wish something would shake things up, get someone to rob the bank so I can suplex them." And despite Chris telling Undyne about each of the dark fountains, she doesn't believe them, so it seems that Chris is cleverly luring Undyne into the dark world by slashing the car's tires and leaving the door to the house open for her to stumble into the fountain. But it might just be like Deltarune's creator to instead have the beloved ghost Napstablook to be the one to initially answer the late night call, and go on his merry way to see what's happened, showing up in the dark world to everyone's surprise, and seeing how Toriel apparently has a history of calling the police for minor things. Undyne might send Napstablook anyways, who may very well be working the night shift, but I still predict that Undyne will likely take a larger role in the chapter. That being said, we could also see Asgore, Toriel's ex-husband, show up, bringing the relationships between Chris and their loving family, who remain unaware to the struggles Chris is facing, bubbling to the surface, with them all seeing that something is clearly wrong with Chris, but still not knowing the real truth of why. The normal route of this chapter may test and strengthen the relationships between Chris's family, as there was clearly a major town event that happened in the past that caused Toriel to end her marriage to her Satin Asgore, who still has a picture of his and Toriel's wedding day on his fridge, still sends her flowers that end up thrown away in the trash can, and takes every chance he can to reconnect with Toriel and his family. This event being related to when Asgore was once the town's chief of police, but seemingly failed to find Noelle's sister Des, who went missing. Whether Des is still alive, being trapped inside a dark world herself, is unknown. So Undyne or Napstablook may let Asgore know that something has happened to Toriel's car, causing Asgore to seize yet another family opportunity and run over. But what's really interesting is that then the characters will find themselves in a strange new setting, whose specific areas were teased through the Spamton sweepstakes through several links hidden on things like its shirtwear page. That shows us a green room, which is a room where actors and performers can relax when they're not performing, introducing us to two weather forecaster characters that will likely be joining us, and the TV from the end of Chapter 2, showing again that this dark world will most likely be centered around different areas that all relate to a type of TV show. Among these areas that we're likely to visit include a weather studio, a cowboy western themed land, based off of the fact that when typing in a link found on a roll of toilet paper merchandise, you're sent to a page that shows Chris and Susie wearing cowboy outfits, while another link found on a Rouse plush page sends you to a page of the characters fighting in mobster outfits, possibly revealing a gang-like noir area in Chapter 3. But something everyone is wondering about is the chapter's named Weird Route. Weird Route meaning that the story, or more specifically the route of events the player takes to get to the end of the chapter, is changed from what it was supposed to be. As for Chapter 3's possible Weird Route, I believe it will involve Toriel becoming aware of Chris's struggle, being puppeteered by an outside force, and trying to save her child along with Asgore joining in. This again could result in the final boss of the game changing, or even in us receiving different dialogue and actions from characters characters like Rousey, who is definitely up to something. Interestingly, while the weird route forces players to take a different path to the end, it's still a route that leads to most of the same things happening, save for Noelle realizing what she's done and Birdley no longer being with us, which seems like a pretty big change in the story, especially considering how players are told at Deltarune's start that their choices don't matter. But when it comes to the weird routes, they just might. One easy prediction would be to say that the weird routes, while changing the story along the way, would ultimately still lead to Deltarune ending the same way no matter what we do. But instead, what would be much more interesting is to see them derail the entire plot altogether, which I predict is what they'll do. So last year, I made a series of Deltarune videos discovering clues about things in the game to figure out things like who the Roaring Knight is, the disappearance of Noelle's sister, and the significance of its really strange tea that I hope to see change throughout the next chapters. And now the next big thing seems to be who the main overarching villain of the chapter will be, along with the chapter's secret boss, that I have a couple crazy guesses about based upon some crazy evidence that I'll cover in just a minute. The secret bosses themselves seem to follow a really sad pattern. The secret boss in chapter 1 was a deranged character named Jevil, who was locked away underneath Card Castle, appropriately named since most of the characters in this chapter are based off of playing cards, with Jevil, the former court jester, being based off of the jokers in a deck. In chapter 2, we then ran into Spamton, who we found living inside a dumpster, discarded from society, and many of us know is based off of the spam emails and advertisements that no one likes. Sadly, both of these characters were doomed from the start, as they both represent items that are normally discarded in the real world, so they too were discarded in the Dark Worlds. Strangely, the reason both of them went insane in the first place has a lot to do with the fact that they were both made aware that they are living inside of a video game, and that the players and people are living in the real world outside. And separate from our mystery secret boss, we have the chapter's main villain, who, after not only reading into Spamton's dialogue in chapter 2, but based upon new evidence hidden in Spamton's sweepstakes, is not who we thought it was all along. In chapter 2, Spamton repeatedly mentions a character named Mike as he spaces out with TV static flashing in his eyes before waking up and telling us that that man is a criminal, while also yelling, "Are you watching, Mike?" when thinking that he was about to ascend beyond the bounds of the game once he captured the player's soul inside Chris, leading many people to believe that Spamton hates Mike, and that Mike is the name of the main villain of chapter 3, who is literally a walking TV that portrayed Spamton and smiles at us at chapter 2's end. But despite this evidence, this has now pretty much been proven to not be the case. You see, in the Spamton sweepstakes, when clicking on a link found in the engraved wedding ring page, we are taken to a page that says the following: "Everything is his fault. Pay. Everyone is going to pay. Everyone except Mike." Then clicking on the cross-out TV on the page, we find ourselves on a new page full of TV static whose URL at the top reads "Damn you, Tenna," providing some concrete evidence that Mike isn't the one Spamton hates, but rather it's a character named Tenna, likely based off of the name Atenna, further relating this character to televisions, and being a TV and having the power to ruin Spamton's career, is likely the one in charge of the Dark World and is the main villain for the 3rd chapter. But what is perhaps the most interesting thing is who the secret boss will then be. One guess is that the secret boss will then be Spamton's friend Mike, who I think all of us are guessing to be a microphone, who, like Spamton, is discarded in his own way, being replaced by Tenna, just like the radio was replaced by the television back in the day, leading Mike to also become aware of his video game existence through some strange means and either is cool with it or goes insane. But a lesser known possibility is that the secret boss could instead be something that was physically discarded in the room the Dark Fountain was opened in, just like Jevil and Spamton were. Looking around the room, the only object that we can find to be thrown away is the flowers that Asgore gave to Toriel that she promptly dumped into the trash can that conveniently is nearby the fountain, leading to a secret boss that not only is aware of its strange existence, but also is one that may serve to test the relationship between Asgore, Toriel, and even Chris. But if none of this was very interesting, then I saved my most interesting thought for last. Looking further into the Spamton sweepstakes, you'll find not only information for the next chapter, but also entry after entry of Noelle writing and searching for information about her missing sister Des, possibly foreshadowing more to come. If you want the whole story about Deltarune's biggest unsolved questions, then check out this video. See you in the next one!